Your signature is on the prenup, Meredith. My lawyer says I get to keep everything. James tossed the document across the mahogany table with a smirk. Little did he know I'd spent the last 6 months meticulously documenting his financial fraud, and the FBI agent sitting in my car outside was about to make our divorce negotiations far more interesting than he had planned. 3 years earlier, I'd been Meredith Chen, rising star at Morgan Stanley with an MBA from Wharton and a corner office with a view of Manhattan. Now I was Meredith Reynolds, trophy wife to tech CEO James Reynolds, relegated to planning dinner parties and looking presentable at corporate functions. The transformation hadn't happened overnight, but through a series of small compromises that eventually erased the ambitious woman I once was. We met at an investment conference where I was representing my firm. James approached after my presentation, all charm and intelligent questions. At 42, he was 12 years my senior, but carried himself with the confidence of someone who had built something substantial. His company, Nexus Technologies, was making waves in enterprise software, and our conversation about valuation models and market penetration strategy extended into dinner. Most women's eyes glaze over when I talk about scalable infrastructure, he said, refilling my wine glass. You not only understand it, you've challenged 3 of my assumptions. I find that incredibly attractive. I was flattered, of course, and impressed by his apparent respect for my professional acumen. His courtship was deliberate and thoughtful. Tickets to the symphony, discussions about books we both enjoyed, cooking classes where we laughed over our mutual incompetence with pastry dough. When he proposed 8 months later, I accepted without hesitation. The warning signs emerged slowly after the wedding. James suggested I scale back my hours at work when his business trips became more frequent. I need you at the Henderson dinner on Thursday, he'd say. They're potential investors. Can't you delegate that project to someone else? Each time I acquiesced, something small died inside me. When I finally expressed my frustration, his response was both gentle and undermining. Darling, you don't need to prove yourself anymore. My company's valuation hit $800 million last quarter. We're set for life. Why stress yourself for a paycheck you don't need? 6 months later, I resigned from my position. James was delighted. Now you can focus on what really matters, he said, without specifying what that might be. What followed was my slow disappearance. I became a corporate wife, arranging our social calendar, overseeing renovations of our Connecticut home, and standing beside James at events, smiling and making appropriate conversation with the spouses of other executives, while the important people discussed business matters. I suggested starting a family, thinking children might fill the growing emptiness, but James was dismissive. Not yet. The company's at a crucial growth stage. I need to focus. The first concrete evidence of his infidelity came in the form of a hotel receipt accidentally left in his suit pocket. The Four Seasons, a Thursday night when he claimed to be in Chicago. The room service order included 2 breakfast entrees. When confronted, he didn't bother denying it. It's just physical, Meredith. It doesn't mean anything. You've been so distant lately. Somehow, I had become the problem. My distance had driven him to seek comfort elsewhere. I swallowed my pride and suggested marriage counseling. He agreed, attended 2 sessions, then began finding excuses to miss appointments. The real breaking point came when I discovered that James had opened accounts in my name and used them for questionable transactions. I found the evidence while organizing tax documents, statements from banks I'd never heard of, with withdrawals and deposits that made no sense for our household. When I questioned him, his demeanor changed completely. You shouldn't be digging through financial matters you don't understand, he snapped. Just stick to planning the Christmas party. That night, I lay awake beside him, staring at the ceiling and finally seeing my marriage clearly for what it was, a gilded cage. The next morning, I began my careful exit strategy. First, I consulted a divorce attorney, discreetly paying in cash for my personal savings that James knew nothing about. Then I started gathering evidence, not just of his affairs, which were merely symptoms, but of the financial irregularities that appeared increasingly suspicious the more I investigated. I leveraged old contacts from my banking days, friends who were happy to provide guidance without asking too many questions. What emerged was a pattern of activity that suggested James was using shell companies to hide assets and potentially engaging in securities fraud related to his position at Nexus. For 6 months, I played the dutiful wife while building my case. I restored my professional connections, quietly laid groundwork for financial independence, and meticulously documented everything. Then I contacted the Securities and Exchange Commission through their whistleblower program. The day I told James I wanted a divorce, he laughed. Actually laughed. On what grounds? He asked, amused at my apparent naivety. Irreconcilable differences would be the kindest option. I replied evenly. His amusement faded to irritation. You signed a prenuptial agreement, Meredith. You'll get the settlement outlined there and nothing more. Don't make this unpleasant. 2 weeks later, we sat in our attorney's conference room for preliminary discussions. James was accompanied by Martin Schiff, his longtime legal counsel and friend. I brought Diane Keating, a partner at a top divorce firm known for representing women in high net worth cases. Before we begin, James said, sliding the prenuptial agreement across the table, let's establish what we're talking about here. According to paragraph 12, in the event of a divorce initiated by either party before the 10-year mark, Meredith receives a one-time payment of $2 million. No alimony, no property division. Diane took the document, reviewed it briefly, then placed it in her folder without comment. My client is prepared to be reasonable, she said calmly. However, there are some matters that may affect the validity of this agreement. James and Martin exchanged confident glances. The prenup is ironclad, Martin insisted. Drafted by me personally, properly executed, fully disclosed financials. There are no grounds for contestation. Perhaps, Diane continued, unfazed. But there is the matter of the fraudulent financial disclosures. James stiffened slightly but maintained his composure. I disclosed everything required by law at the time of execution. Any subsequent changes in my financial status are irrelevant to the agreement's validity. I'm not referring to omissions, I interjected, speaking directly to James. I'm referring to the shell companies you created to hide assets, the accounts you opened in my name without my knowledge, the misrepresentations to Nexus investors about company performance. The color drained from his face. What are you talking about? I nodded to Diane, who removed a thick file from her briefcase and placed it on the table. We have documentation of at least $18 million in hidden assets, plus evidence of multiple securities violations. Special Agent Thomas from the FBI is very interested in discussing these matters with you. This is absurd, Martin sputtered. You're making baseless accusations to try to leverage a better settlement. If they're baseless, I replied, then you have nothing to worry about. But the SEC disagrees, and they've opened a formal investigation based on the evidence I provided through their whistleblower program. James stared at me, his expression shifting from shock to fury. You wouldn't dare. You'll go down with me if there's any truth to this. No, I won't, I said calmly. I've been granted immunity in exchange for my cooperation, and the agents have already subpoenaed your personal and business records. The room fell silent. Martin whispered urgently to James, who seemed suddenly diminished, his confident posture collapsing into something closer to panic. What do you want? He finally asked. A fair settlement, I responded. 50% of all marital assets, the legitimate ones, and sole ownership of the Connecticut house. No alimony, clean break. And if I refuse, then we proceed to discovery, where your financial dealings will be thoroughly examined by the court. Simultaneously, the federal investigation will move forward. Your investors will likely learn of the SEC's interest in Nexus, which I imagine would affect the company's valuation rather dramatically. Martin pulled James aside for a hushed consultation. When they returned to the table, James was visibly shaken. We'll need time to prepare a counteroffer, Martin announced stiffly. Take all the time you need, Diane smiled. But be aware that the FBI has already scheduled an interview with Mr. Reynolds for Thursday morning. It might be advantageous to resolve our matters before that meeting takes place. As we gathered our materials to leave, James grabbed my arm. Why are you doing this? Was I really such a terrible husband? I looked into his eyes, searching for any trace of the man I thought I had married. You didn't consider me a partner, James. You wanted an accessory, not a wife. And when you involved me in your fraud by using my identity, you crossed a line that can't be uncrossed. I gave you everything, he hissed. No, I corrected him. You took everything from me, my career, my independence, my self-respect. I'm simply taking it back. The settlement was finalized in record time. James transferred assets worth $22 million to me, far more than the prenup's $2 million provision, and signed over the Connecticut property without argument. In exchange, I agreed not to voluntarily provide additional information to investigators beyond what I had already submitted. It wasn't a clean victory. The SEC investigation proceeded regardless, and 6 months later, James was indicted on multiple charges of securities fraud and financial misrepresentation. Nexus Technologies' stock plummeted, and James was forced to resign as CEO. The man who had once commanded rooms with his presence now appeared haggard and diminished in courthouse photographs. I felt no satisfaction in his downfall, only relief that I had escaped and regret for the years I had surrendered my identity to become someone's idea of a perfect wife. I sold the Connecticut house and moved back to Manhattan, renting a modest apartment in Chelsea while I plotted my next steps. With financial security came the luxury of time to rediscover who I was beyond my relationship with James. When I was ready, I accepted a position with a boutique investment firm focused on funding women-led startups. The salary was half what I'd earned at Morgan Stanley, but the work was meaningful, and I discovered I had valuable perspective to offer entrepreneurs navigating the complexities of business growth while maintaining their core values. 3 years after the divorce, I received an unexpected letter. James had been sentenced to 6 years in federal prison but was serving his time at a minimum security facility. His letter was neither an apology nor an accusation, simply a reflection on how thoroughly he had lost his way in pursuit of wealth and status. I convinced myself that rules were for ordinary people, he wrote, that my intelligence entitled me to take shortcuts others couldn't see. I didn't value what really mattered until it was gone. I didn't respond. Some chapters are better left closed. Last month, my firm backed a promising medical technology company founded by a brilliant neuroscientist who left academia to commercialize her research. During our first meeting, she confessed her fears about losing her scientific integrity in the business world. "How do I build something successful without compromising who I am?" she asked. I thought carefully before answering. Success isn't just about the valuation of your company. It's about staying true to your values while creating something meaningful. The moment you compromise your core principles for expedience or appearance, you've already failed, regardless of what the balance sheet says. She nodded slowly. "You sound like you've learned that lesson personally." "The hard way," I acknowledged. But it was worth every painful step. As I left her lab that evening, I felt the weight of my wedding ring, which I still wore on my right hand as a reminder, differently than before. It no longer represented loss or betrayal, but a hard-won wisdom I couldn't have gained any other way. Sometimes the most valuable lessons cost everything we thought we wanted, only to give us what we truly need. My golden parachute wasn't the financial settlement, substantial though it was. It was the reclamation of myself, the woman who had temporarily disappeared into someone else's expectation, but who had found her way back, stronger and more certain than before.